ABC, Araceli and Colette Dynamic Change. My name is Araceli, and I'm a transition wealth advisor. And I love helping single professional women to rearrange their finances so they can come out on top. And as you know, I'm also a real estate investor, and I'm here with my partner, Colette. She's a realtor. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Colette Raba. I am a real estate broker in the GTA. And today I actually am in my car.
Yeah, what's going on?
Well, that's why, and it's a beautiful day, so I don't even need a coat or anything. It's fantastic. So, and you can see the sun might start, hitting me in different ways. But I'm in my car because right now, I have contractors in my house and they're making a lot of noise. Because I'm adding a separate entrance to have an income suite in my basement.
Mm.
So Araceli and I, that's why we do this show, is because we don't just walk the walk, or talk the talk, we walk the walk too. So not just having income properties in our own homes, but we also have information about long-term rental, short-term rental, flipping, whichever way you want to really look at real estate as an investment. We help you. And obviously just buying to live in a house too, that's an investment in yourself too. So lots of exciting stuff going on.
I know. Well, I think that is, for people that want to experiment with real estate investing, is one of the easiest way to kind of dip your toe in the water, right?
Yes.
Just to try it out, because you need to be able to do several things. Obviously, manage the contractors, then get a tenant, make sure that everything is going well. So all that relationship, it takes some skill, and some people are just really not cut out to do that. So you got to know yourself, and this is the easiest way to kind of get started.
Right. And the other thing too is, and because Araceli, this is why I like doing the show with her, because it's all about the money and the numbers. So if the numbers don't work out as an investment, that's really where people, I find with my clients and people who I've talked to about investment properties, they don't see the numbers. They don't understand the numbers. They don't know how it all works out, especially with the renovation. That, let's say this is costing me $10,000 to do this. How long is it going to take me to have it come back?
Come back, yeah.
So I don't have to have the cash in hand. Maybe I can put it on a HELOC. Maybe I can borrow it in another way. I don't need the cash to pay for the contractors right away. So I know that's not really what we're going to talk about today. It's a little bit what we wanted to talk about today, but generally speaking.
Yeah, it's actually a really good segue, because what we wanted to talk to you about is something that a client of Colette came back and asked her, and it has to do with leasing or renting.
Yes, right.
Colette, do you want to explain?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry. So this is the funny thing about real estate brokers, agents, realtors, whichever, we're all one and the same. So the funny thing is, I don't really help tenants, just to be clear. I don't generally help tenants because it's very detailed work to be able to help tenants in a building, and a lot of let's say bigger buildings or condos have a property manager already that takes care of that. But from the landlord side, this is the issue too that I find as a general statement. Ontario law is very much geared to tenants, and landlords don't know their rights, and they don't know how to get a tenant out. This is one of the biggest problems that people come to me with, is how do I get my tenant out? They're either not paying, or I want my house back, or I want my property back, or I'm selling my property. So that's why you need a really good, strong agent as a landlord. So I do help landlords. That's part of my everyday, my every year transaction. What I do for a living, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't think that. A lot of people have this preconceived idea that you don't need help from a realtor if you're a landlord or if you're leasing. That's so wrong. You absolutely need somebody to support you. And, it's just like, oh yeah, I don't need a dentist because I do my own dental work. No, that's crazy.
Can you even do that?
I don't even know if dentists do that, but this is the sort of thing, like, you need the expert, right? So when it comes to leasing too, it's quite detailed. Even we're not talking about commercial leasing, we're talking about residential leasing. Right. So if you're a condo owner, if you rent out your basement, if you rent out a whole home, it doesn't matter if it's detached or if it's whatever it is. There are so many details about a lease that you really need to understand and protect yourself as a landlord. So we're coming from the landlord side of it.
Yeah, and you know what? This is the thing as well, that because, like you mentioned, in Ontario, there's so many laws and they're changing all the time, all the rules, right? And
exactly.
You really need to have somebody that is involved in contracts, that they know what your rights are, especially because if you don't have all the paperwork, then it's harder, and it's actually, it takes a lot longer for you to be able to remove a tenant. So,
but it's almost like, so it's almost like what I tell people when they buy an investment property. What's your end goal? Like, think of your end goal first before you get a tenant in. So your end goal should be, I need to make this much money. I want this type of a tenant. Be as specific as you can, because that, when landlords tell me, I want a family, under 2 kids, I don't want pets, something like that. If you can be so specific on who you want to rent your property to, and it's different for everybody. This makes a lot of sense when it comes to finding the perfect tenant. You also have to be very careful as a landlord, because there's something called human rights code. So you cannot reject someone on their race or their religion, or there's lots of things to understand, that if you don't know how to not reject anybody, but to vet them, to say, this is the type of tenant I want, you have to know human rights violations happen all the time without people really realizing it's a human rights violation. So this is something, again, to use an expert for, to say, okay, look, we're not doing anything wrong. This is exactly the type of tenant. You can reject them only on a very few things. You can't reject them on other things. So if you're not sure about those things, please use an expert. The other thing too that I wanted to mention too is insurance. Insurance is very tricky when it comes to short-term accommodation. So if you want to do an Airbnb, before you decide to make it into an Airbnb, please call an insurance provider to see how much insurance will cost. They have very strict rules about short-term accommodation and what the difference is between this is the funniest thing too. Whenever I'm on the phone with an insurance company, I say, tell me what the difference is between a short-term accommodation or an Airbnb versus a long-term. What is the description of? And it's a little bit different for every insurance company, right? So I find it very funny. It's not funny, but I want to say fascinating what their description is.
Yeah, also, if you do not report this to your insurance company, if something happens, you will not be covered. So please, I know the insurance is a little bit more expensive for that type of use, but you really need to report that to your insurance company. Okay, Colette, tell me about the question or the situation that your client had for the leasing.
Oh my gosh, I can't even remember. See, this is the thing. This is the other thing that I want to say to all of you guys out there. Like, we get so many questions and we love to answer them for you. So please keep them coming. But do you remember?
Yes,
we just talked about this on Monday. I forgot.
So what it was is that you had a situation. There was 2 people living in a rental unit. Both of them were in the lease.
Yes.
But one of them wanted to move out. And we wanted to point this out because it is a tricky situation, and landlords get a little bit confused how they're going to get the last month's back, all of these things. So can you tell us exactly what happened, Colette?
Yeah, and I'm so sorry. I was going to do like a little whiteboard to explain how it works, but I zoned out because I have these guys coming in and out of my house all day. So the funny thing is, So I'll go through this scenario. So hopefully you guys don't need a little drawing, but let me try and see if I can work this out. So I'm representing the landlord, and they have a 1-year lease. So they are fine with the 1-year lease. Let's say, okay, so it's March. Their lease ends at the end of this month. So their lease is from March 2020 to March 2021. They gave proper notice, which is from the tenant side is 60 days, but only one of them wants to move out. The other person does not want to move out. They want to stay. So the landlord was confused, not about the person moving out or moving in. That's fine. But let's say 2 people, and we'll do the math easy. So let's say both people pay $500 each. Okay. So now it's clear to the landlord that the one person who's staying has to take the $1,000 and rent the whole property, and they're responsible for the $1,000 now from now on. They do not want to get another person to come and move in with them because they can afford the $1,000, let's say. They're fine with that. The problem is the last month rent. So when they both move in, typically the tenant pays first and last month rent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's $1,000 for first month, $1,000 for last month. You split that in half. The $1,000 for the last month rent is still active. So let's say it's in a separate account. So now what does the landlord do? Does she give the tenant that's moving out the $500 back? Or does she keep it into the account? What do you think that she should do?
Well, the $1,000 that is the last month's rent, it should stay for the length of the time that the people, whether it's one person or 2 people, because it belongs to the unit. It doesn't belong to the people. It's not divided
Correct.
by the people. So
it belongs, it actually belongs to the lease. So as long as that lease is still active, and in Ontario law, what happens, the lease, even though it's a 1-year lease, doesn't just end.
Mm-hmm.
Ontario lease, how Ontario has been doing this for years and years, is that it just continues, and it's called month to month.
Yeah.
But all the rules still apply. So you can't just say, oh, well, my lease is over, I can have 20 dogs in my unit now. No, it doesn't work that way. The rules still apply as long as the people are there. Unless there's one exception, unless the landlord gives you a new lease to sign, and there are new rules and regulations within that lease.
Mm-hmm.
As a tenant and as a landlord, you're both legally allowed to ask for a new lease if you choose. So if you feel like, oh, I really want to have this person, and this was the interesting thing about my landlord too. She didn't know this. And for years she's been renting, and every year she gives them a new lease. And I said, why do you do that? She goes, well, because I want them to stay for the year. I said, well, that's lovely, but what if you need to get them out? What if they stop paying your rent? That way, if it's month to month, it's not really easier to get them out, but it's not as hard. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's not as difficult because you have to jump through more hoops if you actually have a new lease with these regulations. And the funny thing too is every time she's had this other unit with these people and she wants them out. I said, why do you keep giving them a lease? Stop doing that. Let them go month to month. And then if you ever want to add rules, then you can offer them a new lease and say, these are the stipulations. This is what you have to do. So it's quite funny.
I just wanted to say something about the lease. So sometimes people think that because it's a 1-year lease that you have to stay for 1 year. So this is where communication comes in. I have had tenants that said, you know what, my circumstances change, but they gave me proper notice. You still have to give proper notice. You cannot say, well, I'm leaving at the end of the month, which is next week. You can't say that because then you will have to be enforcing the entire lease. But if somebody comes to you and says, and I had a tenant saying, I'm going to be moving with my boyfriend, things change, he bought a house and it's easier for us to be there. I'm not going to say no. And they already knew ahead of time. She told me ahead of time. So I had enough time to get another tenant. So I allow her to break her lease at 6 months. I think
Right.
it's 7 months, something like that. But
Right.
so she thought that, you know, she
But
wanted to
that's,
give me proper notice. And I think that you can work
yeah,
with people. So anything can be worked
right.
out. Don't think that you're stuck in somewhere, but
Right.
you really need to
Well,
communicate to your landlord.
100%. And also the landlord has to be in communication with the tenant too. So like, this is the interesting thing too, that, you know, as a representative of a landlord, I quote the law a lot because I am representing the landlord. So I want to have, so you always, regardless of which side you're on, as a tenant as well, for you to quote the law too, to say, listen, this is not lawful. You have to give me 90 days notice, or you can't raise my rent this year because of Ontario law, da, da, da. So there's all these things that, you know, if you're not sure of the law, like, this is why I'm here. There are paralegals too, and lawyers, if you have a great lawyer that, you know, picks up the phone and they know Ontario law, not Ontario law, but specifically landlord and tenant law in Ontario. So this is something that don't ever hesitate, and don't think it's a stupid question, because it's very confusing. The laws are very confusing. So let's get back to our story. So now the last month rent, you have $500 with both people, right? So let's say the tenant that moves out, he wants his last month's rent back because he knows the guy that's staying paid the full amount. Now, what do you do as a landlord?
Interesting.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
This is where it gets tricky, right? So, you know, and the way, this is the funny thing too, when I was talking to the landlord, the way she explained it to me, she was getting confused only because she treated March as last month. And I said, okay, hold on a second. You have to picture the last month rent being a separate entity.
Mm-hmm.
It's not March, because the lease is still going on as is, but with one person as opposed to two people. It has nothing to do with the landlord. The lease stays as is, the amount stays as is. So what I said to her was, no, you are getting, you know, the full amount of it. Let's just say the person who's staying gave her the full amount, $1,000 for March. That $500 from the one that's moving out will stay with the last month rent. If the person says, the one that moves out, hey, I want my $500 back, he should get it from the other tenant,
person, yeah,
not the landlord, right? If that's what was discussed.
Yeah.
So everything is fine. She was worried. She thought she has this extra $500, like, yay. And I said, no,
No, you don't.
no, it's this $500 stays with that
Yeah.
last month's rent. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
The one thing that I do is if there is more than one people that are not family, I'm not talking about husband and wife, right? Or
Yes.
that they're friends or cousins, something related,
yeah.
right? Roommates.
Roommates.
The best thing that you can do as a landlord is to get one person to pay the entire rent, and they will collect it from 2-3 people. You don't know how many people are there, right? They are all part of the
I'll
lease.
tell you another story.
Yeah, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So I've had another landlord who there were 5 people that moved in together. So it was a really big house. They weren't students. They were all working professionals, but they're all young. So they wanted to save money. And the landlord said, yes, absolutely. That's fine. So that's exactly what happened. They opened a separate account, especially right now. It's so easy with online accounts. So there's Tangerine, there's EQ Bank, Simply, I think that's a CIBC. So there's a lot of these free accounts that anybody can open, anybody can have access to, but you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I have, 4 other people living with me. We all make sure that there is our allotted amount in that account, not just for rent, but also utilities.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that's so easy for everybody to manage, because why would your roommate want to run after you to say, hey, it's time for rent again, let's go. So that the person that the weakest link should be the one responsible for the rent payment.
But I'm telling you,
because
Colette,
that will keep them on track.
you would think, I have seen so many people on how they manage their finances, and it is tough sometimes. Some people that actually have money, they forget to pay their own bills.
Of course, because like this is the thing too. Online is so much easier when they have a paper, this old fashioned, I hate to complain about it, but sometimes when they get a paper a notice in the mail, and then by the time they write a check, put a stamp, oh, I don't have stamps today, and they put a stamp on it and then mail it out and it's late and all this nonsense. Like there are penalties, right? So I prefer everything online. But as landlords, a lot of landlords still don't take e-transfers. They want a physical check and they want post-dated checks. So this is a discussion before you move in. You have this discussion, landlord and tenant should speak to say, how do you want to get paid? Even if there is a check, doesn't mean that it's not going to bounce. So in your mind, as an old-fashioned, like if you think about it, if the writing checks is so old-fashioned,
I try to avoid. I try to avoid paper at all costs. Same with cash, because sometimes they give you money, and I'm telling you, I did that with my tenant in the U.S. Until I had a separate account that I opened that she could deposit the money there. Then there would be no problem. And then you also have a record that the money was deposited, that you have that, and that they cannot tell you, oh, well, I gave you the money. And then you said, well, but you were short, and it's your word against them. And then this dispute starts to come out. It's always easy to have, a check. I'm not too fond of that. I'd rather them deposit the money in my account, or to send me an e-transfer would be preferable, because I know the amount and the time that is there, and I have a record that they pay the rent.
So most importantly, this is very, very important. I'm glad you brought that up. So number one, as I'm not an accountant, I don't do my own accounting because I get frazzled. But the most important thing is have a separate account, 100% have a separate account for even every unit. So let's say in this case with the person that I'm talking about, she has 2 units. So she doesn't put it all in one unit because she needs to keep her accounting very, very clear. And the second most important thing is always when you get cash, give a receipt. Yes. So never mind, you have to, as soon as you get that money, even if it's on a little piece of paper, say, I've received your $500 this date for rent of this property. Even if you want to give them more description than that, then absolutely. And take a photo of it or take a copy of it to make sure that they can't say, no, you never gave me a receipt. So you have proof of the receipt as well, and the deposit information. So and this is the funny thing too, actually, my daughter recently moved out, and she has a landlord who is a condo owner, and he's like, I want cash. I said to her, you know that he should be giving you a receipt. She goes, well, he's not gonna, and we're okay with that. We both agreed that we're okay with that. I said, okay, because you're not, she can't be liable for anything. She's the one paying. If he does something funny on his taxes, she has nothing to do with that. So like that. So landlords, I'm telling you, there is no way that CRA is not going to find out about you getting money. Oh, yeah. So you might as well be honest about it.
Yeah.
Even if you can't get cash money.
You can always, like, if you're not going to report the income that you're getting, you won't be able to deduct anything against the property. So just make it legal, and it's better that way, because then you get money in, and then you can deduct things that cost you to run the property. So
of course, property management, absolutely. There's tons of stuff you can write off. So that's the thing. Please talk to an accountant if you're thinking about just taking cash. Yeah. I'm not going to say anything about it. That to me, it's not right for me. And as a landlord, I would never do that. I'm always honest with my tenants. Yeah. I give them receipts. I make sure that they understand what the money is going for. When they're paying me rent, I'll say, you know what, if let's say utilities are included, I even specify that this amount is going to utilities. So whether or not you go over this amount or under this amount, your utilities, if you go over this amount, I will be asking you, and that's also in my lease, to say, you know, this allotted money is, let's say $200 a month is going towards utilities and taxes. If I can't charge them extra for taxes, but if I say if your utilities based on use is going to go up, then you're going to have to pay for it. Like, so don't start, you know, having a laundry service and using the washing machine over time or something crazy like that, because I will see it on my utility bill.
For sure, for sure. Okay, so let's just recap your client. So what is the solution for this thing when you have multiple people living in a unit or in a property? What do you do when one or two or whatever, you know, they split and they're moving out?
Okay.
And some of them are staying.
Okay, good question. So you definitely have to talk to the tenant that is staying there and make it very clear to them that the space is the same, the amount of rent is the same, and now they're fully responsible for that. And if they want to sublet, or if they want to get somebody new on the lease with them, let's say there's a girlfriend coming in and we'll pay the difference of the roommate. Something like that, you have to discuss it beforehand and have it on the lease. So when I write a lease, I actually have a clause in there that says, if anybody comes in to stay or visit, they can only stay a maximum amount of time before they have to get back on they get to go on the lease, and then the rent increases as well. So this is something that not a lot of people really write into a lease. The other thing too is like talking to, just having this open communication with the person who's leaving and the person who is staying, to say this, you realize that you have your portion of last month's rent. If the landlord was smart, she would have told the tenant, listen, your last month's rent is going to March. And then the person who's staying, who says, okay, look it, now you owe your half, but also you have to give me the other half for the last month's rent. So really, you're still paying $1,000 in this case for March because you're staying, but half of it is staying with the other last month's rent of the person who's leaving, but then that $500 extra is going to the last month's rent. So you still have a full last month rent payment when the second person decides to move out.
So now if there is only one person left, they will get the entire month for free without paying for anything. So that's how it works. So just make it very, very simple.
It's not for free. Don't change that. It's not for free.
Not for free.
It is being it's held because
in
that's
an account.
Right. Yeah, that's what we can, as Ontario landlords, ask for first and last month's rent first as a kind of commitment that last month will go towards the last month's rent.
The last month,
Right.
Okay, so make it very simple. Don't get confused. And if you get confused, call Colette or call myself. We will try to make it easy for you. But
and you know what? I can't stress this enough. If you have a good lease with all this information on it, you can always revert back to the lease to say, let me read it again. And this is the funny thing too about landlords, God bless them. They don't read the lease. Come on. You know, so when they have a realtor that they trust and they say, hey, you know, I trust you, whatever, I go, no. Let's read it. Like, sit down with me. We read it together so you understand. So there's really that, you know, that understanding to make it very, very clear that these are the rights, these are the rules, this is what's up to you, and this is what's up to the tenant, and that you guys understand the whole picture.
So ensure that you have a good lease that has a lot of clauses, and if you have more than one tenant, just be clear from the beginning with them in case one of them decides to move out. And then you'll have a lot less issues, and then keep an open communication when somebody wants to move out, and everything will go smooth
Right. Right.
Instead of
and
trying
to
to
be
be,
quite honest,
yeah.
Right now in this time, like in Ontario, right now in March, if somebody wants to leave, my experience, my advice would be let them go, because it's so easy. There's a shortage on, well, this is the funny thing too, because there's such a big push on people buying and moving out of their lease, out of their rental units. Some areas, it's a little tricky. There's a lot of supply out there right now for rentals, but also at the same time, if you are offering something at a good price, you won't have any problem renting it. And that's like, I want to say across the board in almost every area, in almost every demographic. So unless you have like a multi-million-dollar home and you're offering, you want a $10,000 lease, like, okay, then you might have a little bit of time on your hands before you can find the right tenant. But there's always somebody, and that's the interesting thing too. We didn't talk too much about short-term accommodation and the difference between short-term and long-term. Generally speaking, this is very general. You have to have a lease and has to be over 32 days. So more than a month. So if you have those two parameters, you're not considered short-term, you're considered long-term.
Okay.
So I hope that's helpful.
So we're going to talk more about that in the next episode, because that also needs a bigger discussion. So with that said, thank you, Colette, for sharing this. I think this is a very good subject for landlords especially. So tell us your question, give us your question, ask us anything that you think that might be, or you have a specific situation that we haven't talked about it, and we'll discuss it here and we'll give you our opinion. So we will see you next week.
Yes.
Thank you for watching, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Colette.
Go back in now.